She gave shelter to a wandering cowboy during the storm, never imagining she would fall in love with him. "Please let me in," shouted a masculine voice from the other side of the door, barely audible amidst the roar of the rain and thunder. Elena Fuentes stood motionless, holding a cup of hot tea in her hands. The storm had been battering Valle Sereno for 2 days, but tonight it had worsened. Outside, the wind was tearing through Texas, and the rain fell as if the sky were collapsing onto the earth. "Is anyone there? My truck broke down on the road," the voice insisted. Elena set the cup on the table and approached cautiously. She grabbed the shotgun her father always kept by the entrance and asked, "Who's there?" "My name's Mateo Reyes. I'm soaked and I got hurt when my truck veered off the road. I just need shelter until the storm passes." Elena cracked the door open, keeping the weapon ready. Before her stood a young man, completely drenched, with a bleeding cut on his forehead mixing with the rain. His dark eyes looked at her with a mix of pleading and resignation. "Please," he murmured, shivering. Something in his gaze made Elena lower the shotgun slightly. After all, for generations, the El Amanecer Ranch had been a refuge for travelers lost in Jalisco's storms. "Come in," she said finally, opening the door wider. "But I'm warning you, I know how to use this," she added, pointing to the shotgun. The man stumbled in, leaving a puddle of water on the wooden floor. "Thank you. I swear I'm just passing through," he said, taking off his soaked jacket. "Elena, who are you talking to?" The voice of Doña Mercedes, her grandmother, came from the kitchen. "A traveler, Grandma." The storm left him stranded. The old woman appeared in the doorway, drying her hands on her apron, her narrowed eyes scrutinizing the stranger from head to toe. "You're bleeding, young man," she observed. "Elena, get the first aid kit while I make him some hot coffee." As she cleaned the wound on his forehead, Elena noticed the calluses on the man's hands and his strong arms. Definitely someone accustomed to hard work. "What brings you to these parts?" Doña Mercedes asked directly while serving him coffee. "I work wherever I'm needed. I'm a horse tamer," he replied, avoiding her gaze. "Thank you for the coffee, ma'am." "Tamer," Elena raised an eyebrow. "We have a horse my father couldn't even tame before." She stopped and looked away. "I'm sorry," Mateo said. "A long time ago?" 6 months, Doña Mercedes replied. "My son-in-law was the best rancher in the region. Since then, Elena's been running everything." "It's not easy," Elena admitted. "I'm a veterinarian, but running a ranch is another thing." The man nodded, understanding. The storm continued, roaring outside, and it became clear Mateo couldn't leave that night. Elena prepared the guest room for him, and though she locked her bedroom door, something told her she didn't need to fear him. Over the next few days, as the rain kept falling, Mateo began helping with ranch chores. Elena was impressed by how he handled the animals, especially when he approached Tormenta, the black horse no one had been able to tame. "You have a gift," she told him one afternoon, watching him work with the animal. Mateo stroked the horse's neck with surprising gentleness. "Animals are easier to understand than people," he replied without looking at her. "They don't judge your past." There was something in his tone that sparked Elena's curiosity. One day, Lucia Mendoza, the town teacher and Elena's best friend, arrived at the ranch with supplies. "Good grief, the town's half flooded," she commented while taking off her rubber boots. "And who's that?" she asked, spotting Mateo working in the stable. "His name's Mateo. The storm left him stranded here." Lucia observed the man with interest, then leaned toward Elena. "Be careful, friend. Mysterious men always bring trouble." "He's just helping while the storm passes," Elena defended. That night, while searching for medicine for a sick mare in Mateo's room, Elena found an old backpack. She didn't mean to snoop, but when she moved it, an ID fell out with another name, Daniel Herrera. Next to it, a yellowed newspaper clipping showed the headline, "Fire at La Esperanza Ranch claims 1 life. Son of landowner Ibarra dies in tragic circumstances." With her heart racing, Elena stepped into the hallway and collided directly with Mateo's chest. "What were you doing in my room?" he asked with an expression she hadn't seen before. "Who are you really?" she replied, showing him the ID. "Daniel Herrera? And what do you have to do with this fire?" Mateo paled. For a moment Elena thought he'd leave or deny everything, but instead, his shoulders slumped with a resignation that disarmed her. I guess you deserve to know from the start, he said quietly. I've been running for 3 years, not from the law, but from Roberto Ibarra, the most powerful landowner in Sonora, who blames me for his son's death in that fire. The rain pounded the windows as Elena stared at this man, torn between fear and an inexplicable compassion. The silence between them was broken only by lightning flashes illuminating the room every few seconds. She kept her eyes fixed on the fake ID and the newspaper clipping. "Tell me everything," she demanded finally. "If you're staying under my roof, I deserve the truth." Mateo ran a hand through his wet hair and nodded. Ibarra's son, Fernando, was a reckless kid who wanted to tame every horse without the experience. That day, he insisted on riding a newly arrived thoroughbred despite my warnings. The horse got spooked when lightning struck nearby, knocked over an oil lamp, and everything went up in flames in seconds. His voice trembled slightly as he continued. "I tried to get him out, but a beam collapsed before I could reach him. Roberto Ibarra blamed me. Since then, he sent his men after me across the country." "And that's why you keep changing your name?" Elena asked, still wary. "A cowboy without official papers finds work easier than a man wanted for murder," he replied bitterly. "If you want me to leave tomorrow, I'll understand." Elena stayed silent, weighing the situation. Finally, she sighed. "You can stay until you fix your truck," she conceded. "But no more secrets from now on." The next morning dawned with a temporary lull in the storm. Elena went out early to assess the ranch's damage. Several fences had fallen, and the small stable's roof needed urgent repairs. As she surveyed the damage, she watched Mateo working. With Tormenta in the corral, the horse, always untamable, seemed calm under his hands. For a moment, Elena remembered her father trying to tame that same animal without success. "Good morning," Lucia greeted, startling her. "I came to see how you survived the night. Everything okay?" "All in order," Elena replied, looking away from Mateo. "How's the town?" "The water's going down, but several businesses are affected," Lucia explained. "Don Javier says he needs to see you urgently. He seems worried." 2 hours later, Elena parked her truck in front of El Clavo, the auto hardware store. Don Javier, a man of about 65 and a close friend of her father, greeted her with a grim expression. "Elena, my dear, I'm glad you came," he said, leading her to the back. "I need to warn you about something." "What's wrong, Don Javier?" Man's been asking about you and the ranch. Says he's from a real estate company, but I recognize the name on his papers. He works for Roberto Ibarra." Elena felt a chill run down her spine. "Roberto Ibarra, the landowner from Sonora?" "The very same. He's been buying up land across the region," the old man confirmed. "Your father never wanted to sell, and that's why Ibarra hated him. He even threatened him once." "My father knew Ibarra?" Elena asked, surprised. "All ranchers know the Ibarra's child. They're like vultures waiting for someone to falter to take their land." Back at the ranch, Elena couldn't stop thinking about what she'd learned. Was it a coincidence that Mateo, hunted by Ibarra, had ended up at her ranch? At dusk, when the sky cleared momentarily, Elena made an impulsive decision. "Let's go," she told Mateo, saddling 2 horses. "I want to show you something." They rode in silence to a small waterfall hidden among the hills. The setting sun painted the water gold and pink. "It's beautiful," Mateo murmured. "I used to come here with my father when I needed to think," Elena confessed. "It's like a part of him is still alive in this place." They sat on a rock by the water. After a long silence, Mateo began to speak. The fire was truly an accident. Fernando was impulsive, but not bad. When the stable started burning, I could hear him shouting my name. His foot was trapped under a beam. His voice broke for a moment. "The guilt haunts me every day. I couldn't save him, but I didn't kill anyone. Though Ibarra has sworn I'll pay no matter what." Elena looked at him. For the first time since he arrived, Mateo seemed truly vulnerable. "I believe you," she said simply. The look of surprise on Mateo's face was followed by something deeper. A gratitude that needed no words. The moment was interrupted by the sound of an engine approaching quickly. When they reached the ranch, they found Lucia waiting with papers in hand and a panicked expression. "Elena, thank God you're here," she exclaimed. My brother, the lawyer, sent me this. Roberto Ibarra has bought the overdue mortgage on El Amanecer from the bank. He plans to foreclose. What? Elena took the documents with trembling hands. But my father left everything in order. It seems there were loans he didn't mention, Lucia explained. You have 3 weeks to pay or vacate. Elena turned to Mateo, betrayal flashing in her eyes. Did you know Ibarra was after my ranch? Is that why you stayed? To help him? No, Mateo exclaimed, paling. I had no idea, but now I understand why he found me so fast. He didn't come for me. He came for your land. Get out of my house, Elena shouted, tears threatening to spill. Leave! That night, as Mateo gathered his few belongings under Doña Mercedes' watchful eye, the wind began to pick up again. The radio warned of a possible tornado forming in the region. Child, he can't leave in this weather, the old woman intervened. Whatever he's done, he doesn't deserve to die in the storm. Elena stood on the porch, watching the black clouds swirling, anger battling her sense of responsibility. You can stay in the barn until the storm passes, she conceded finally. Tomorrow, you're gone. Barely an hour later, emergency sirens began blaring across the valley. The tornado was touching down less than a kilometer from the ranch. Elena ran around securing windows when she saw Mateo desperately trying to move the frightened horses to safety. To the basement! Elena shouted over the roar of the wind. Quick! Together, they managed to get Tormenta and 2 mares to the reinforced stable. As they were about to run to the house, a terrible crash shook the earth. Part of the main house's roof was tearing off. Grandma! Elena screamed. They ran to the entrance just as Doña Mercedes emerged, limping. The basement! Mateo yelled, scooping the old woman into his arms. The 3 barely managed to shut the basement door as the tornado roared over the ranch. In the damp darkness, lit only by an old oil lamp, Elena felt the world crumbling around her. Everything's going to be okay, Mateo murmured, sitting beside her. I promise. How can you promise that? Elena whispered, tears finally spilling over. I'm going to lose the ranch, just like I almost lost my grandmother today. I won't let that happen, he replied, taking her hand. I'll face Ibarra, if I have to. I won't let him hurt you. Their eyes met in the dim light, and something shifted between them. Without thinking, Elena leaned toward him. Their lips met in a desperate kiss, as if they'd found a moment of perfect calm amid the chaos. When they pulled apart, both panting slightly, Doña Mercedes coughed from the corner. I always said the best love stories start in the worst storms, she commented with a tired smile. The days after the tornado were a frenzy of work. 6 roof tiles were torn off. A tree had fallen on the back corral, and the small barn was practically destroyed. El Amanecer had survived, but barely. Elena, with dark circles from sleepless nights, reviewed the mortgage documents again, at the kitchen table. The figure remained impossible. 200,000 pesos to stop Roberto Ibarra from taking the property. You could sell some of the livestock, Doña Mercedes suggested, placing a cup of coffee beside her granddaughter. It wouldn't cover even half, Grandma, Elena replied, rubbing her temples. And without the livestock, how would we survive afterward? Mateo entered the kitchen, his shirt soaked with sweat from working all morning to fix the corral. I have an idea, he said, pouring himself some fresh water. My horse-taming exhibitions always draw a crowd. We could hold an event here, charge admission, sell food. Elena looked at him, considering the proposal. I know some cowboys who'd come to participate, he continued. And with Tormenta, we could put on a special show. That horse has something. People would pay to see. It's not a bad idea, Elena admitted. I could offer vet consultations at a discount during the event. Thus began a race against time. Elena worked double shifts as a veterinarian at neighboring ranches. Mateo organized the taming exhibition, contacting old friends from the circuit and training Tormenta for a special performance. Doña Mercedes oversaw preparations for the food they'd sell during the event. One afternoon, while Elena was sorting through old documents looking for papers that might help legally, Doña Mercedes entered her room with a carved wooden box. Your father kept important things here, she said, placing the box on the bed. Maybe you'll find something useful. Among faded photos, old deeds, and yellowed letters, Elena found a folder with legal documents. As she reviewed them, her eyes widened in surprise. "Grandma, look at this. These are purchase contracts for neighboring lands with signatures that look forged." The old woman adjusted her glasses and examined the papers. "That's Don Gilberto's signature, but he never sold his lands to anyone. He died insisting they'd been stolen. And here's the buyer's name. Ibarra Real Estate Group," Elena added. "With this, we could stop him." Their enthusiasm didn't last long. The next day, while discussing how to use the information, Lucia arrived at the ranch with a young man leaning on a cane. "Elena, he wants to talk to you," Lucia said, visibly nervous. "It's important." "Fernando Ibarra," the stranger introduced, himself extending his hand. "And yes, I'm supposed to be dead." The shock left Elena speechless. Mateo, entering at that moment carrying tools, dropped everything with a clatter. "Fernando," he whispered, as if seeing a ghost. The young Ibarra smiled bitterly. "The same one you tried to save 3 years ago, Mateo. Or should I say, Daniel." The tension was palpable as everyone sat in the living room. Fernando explained how he'd survived the fire with severe burns and a shattered leg. "My father made everyone believe I was dead," he said, pointing to his prosthetic leg. "When I woke up in the hospital, he forbade me from contacting Mateo, or telling anyone I was alive." "Why would he do that?" Elena asked, confused. "To punish the insolent cowboy who defied his orders," Fernando replied bitterly. "My father is a man obsessed with control and power. Always has been." Fernando explained he'd been secretly following his father, gathering evidence of his fraudulent dealings. "He doesn't just want your land, Elena," he warned. "He's discovered an aquifer under El Amanecer worth millions. He's kept it secret while buying up surrounding properties." "That explains why he's been so set on getting this ranch," Doña Mercedes murmured. "And why he was so eager to find me," Mateo added. "He knows I'm aware of his methods." Elena showed them the documents she'd found. Fernando nodded, recognizing them. "These fit with other evidence I have. We can file a formal complaint." They spent hours planning their strategy. Fernando provided names of contacts in the prosecutor's office not bought by his father. Elena organized the documents and evidence. Mateo offered to testify about what he knew of Ibarra's shady dealings. "Tomorrow morning, we'll go to the city," Elena decided. "The sooner we file the complaint, the better." That night, while the others slept, Elena found Mateo sitting on the porch, staring at the stars shining after days of storms. "I can't believe Fernando's alive," he murmured as she sat beside him. "For 3 years, I've blamed myself for his death." "You can let go of that guilt now," Elena replied softly. "It's not that easy," Mateo confessed. "The fire happened, and someone could have died because of my negligence." "It wasn't your fault," she insisted, taking his hand. "And now, you have a chance to do the right thing." The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken emotions. Elena felt Mateo's pulse quicken under her fingers. "Elena, he began, but was interrupted by a sudden noise. Headlights from 3 trucks illuminated the ranch's entrance, speeding down the dirt road. "Quick, wake everyone!" Mateo shouted, jumping to his feet. They barely had time to alert Doña Mercedes, Fernando, and Lucia when armed men surrounded the house. One of them threw something at the main stable. In seconds, flames began devouring the wooden structure. "The horses!" Elena screamed, running toward the fire. Mateo followed without hesitation. Inside the stable, the animals whinnied in terror. Between the two of them, they managed to open the stall doors, letting most escape. But Tormenta, panicked, refused to move from the far corner. "Go!" Mateo shouted to Elena, coughing through the smoke. "I'll get him out." "I'm not leaving you," she replied, covering her mouth with a handkerchief. Outside, gunshots rang out. Fernando and Lucia had managed to scare off some attackers, but the fire was spreading fast. Mateo finally reached Tormenta and calmed him enough to lead him toward the exit. They were a few meters from the door when a burning beam fell from the ceiling. "Watch out!" Elena lunged forward, pushing Mateo. The beam crashed down, partially blocking the exit. Tormenta leaped over it and escaped, but Mateo was trapped, his left arm under the burning debris. Ignoring the searing heat, Elena freed Mateo and dragged him out of the stable just as the roof collapsed completely. In the ensuing chaos, the attackers fled, likely not expecting armed resistance or additional witnesses. Fernando had managed to photograph the license plate of one of the vehicles before they escaped. Mateo lay unconscious on the grass, with severe burns on his arm and side. Elena, with trembling hands, examined his wounds while Lucia called emergency services. "Please, hold on," Elena whispered, clutching Mateo's uninjured hand. "Don't you dare leave me now." Doña Mercedes, watching from a few meters away, crossed herself slowly. "Tonight, history repeated itself," the old woman murmured. "But this time, no one will die in the fire. I promise you, my dear." The ambulance took an eternal 20 minutes to arrive. As the paramedics loaded Mateo, Elena made a silent promise. She would fight for the ranch, for her family, and for the man who had risked his life to save what she loved. Amid the smoldering ashes of the stable, with her heart torn between fear and determination, Elena Fuentes knew nothing would ever be the same. The real storm was just beginning. The smell of disinfectant filled the halls of Valle Sereno's small hospital. Elena had spent 3 days splitting her time between Mateo's room, where he remained unconscious, and the battered ranch. The burns on his left arm and side were severe, but the doctors assured her there would be no permanent damage. "You should go rest," Lucia suggested, arriving with coffee and sandwiches. "I'll stay with him." "I'm fine," Elena insisted, though the dark circles under her eyes said otherwise. "How's everything at the ranch?" "Fernando and your grandmother are handling things," Lucia replied. "But there are problems. Someone blocked the main road with logs and rocks, and this morning the water supply stopped working." Elena closed her eyes, clenching her fists. These were clearly pressure tactics orchestrated by Roberto Ibarra. "What about the complaint we filed?" "My brother says the judge is reviewing it," Lucia answered, frustrated. "We all know what that means. Ibarra has half the region's officials in his pocket." At that moment, Mateo stirred in bed, letting out a faint groan. Elena rushed to his side, taking his good hand. "Mateo, can you hear me?" His eyelids fluttered before opening slowly. Disoriented, he looked around until his gaze focused on Elena. "The stable," he murmured hoarsely. "The horses." "All safe," she reassured him. "Tormenta's fine, thanks to you." A sigh of relief escaped his parched lips. "How long?" 3 days, Elena replied. "You gave us quite a scare." He tried to sit up but collapsed back in pain. "Ibarra knows we're gathering evidence against him," he said urgently. "He won't stop at anything." "I know," Elena replied. "He's already started sabotaging the ranch." Mateo's recovery was slow. A week later, against medical advice, he insisted on returning to the ranch. Elena drove in silence, glancing at him as he stared out at the landscape, lost in thought. Upon arriving, they found a scene that warmed their hearts. A group of neighbors and friends had come to help, repairing the corral, clearing debris, and bringing water in containers. "Don Javier organized everything," Doña Mercedes explained as she greeted them. "The town's people are on our side." "It's not enough," Mateo murmured later, when they were alone. "Ibarra has money and armed men. They can't hold out long." That night, after a quiet dinner, Elena found Mateo packing his few belongings. "What are you doing?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "I have to go," he replied without looking at her. "As long as I'm here, everyone's in danger." "And where will you go? Keep running?" "To face Ibarra," Mateo declared with determination. "It's the only way to end this." Elena felt the world crumbling beneath her. "It's madness. He has armed men, influence—" "And I have the truth," he interrupted, "and Fernando, his own son, as a witness. It's time to stop running." He approached her, gently caressing her cheek. "It's the only way you'll be safe," he added softly. "As long as he's after me, you'll never have peace." Elena wanted to scream, to beg him to stay, but the words wouldn't come. Deep down, she knew he was right. "Promise me you'll come back," she said finally, holding back tears. Mateo looked at her intensely, as if memorizing every detail of her face. "If I survive, I'll come back," he promised. I swear it on what I love most. The kiss that followed was different from the others. It tasted of farewell, of fear, but also of a promise that transcended words. The next morning, Elena woke and knew immediately that Matteo was gone. On the kitchen table, she found a simple letter. I'll come back for you when this is over. Take care of Tormenta. He understands storms better than anyone. I love you. Matteo. The days turned into weeks. Elena poured all her energy into saving the ranch, working tirelessly from dawn to late at night. With Don Javier and other neighbors' help, they set up an alternative water supply system. Lucia organized a watch committee with shifts to keep the ranch protected day and night. Meanwhile, Doña Mercedes embarked on her own mission. With surprising vitality for her 78 years, she traveled to the state capital to seek out old friends who had worked in the regional government. Your father wasn't just a rancher, child, she explained upon her return. He was an agricultural advisor for years. He had important contacts. From that trip, the old woman brought news that changed everything. Elena's father had started the process to declare El Amanecer a protected natural reserve due to its underground springs. If we can complete those procedures, no real estate development can be built here, Doña Mercedes explained. The aquifer would be protected by federal law. It was a race against time. Elena picked up the paperwork where her father had left off, battling bureaucracy with fierce determination. Every night, however, she stepped onto the porch and looked down the road, hoping to see Matteo's figure returning home. One rainy afternoon, nearly a month after Matteo's departure, an unfamiliar car approached the ranch. Elena, brushing Tormenta in the new makeshift shed, watched cautiously as Fernando Ibarra stepped out. Elena, he greeted with a grim expression. I have news. Her heart stopped for a moment. Had the worst happened? Matteo? She asked in a faint voice. He's alive, Fernando replied quickly, but he faced my father as planned. He explained that Matteo had gone to Roberto Ibarra's hacienda in Sonora, demanding a face-to-face meeting. Surprisingly, the old landowner had agreed. Matteo offered a deal, Fernando continued. He'd take full responsibility for the fire 3 years ago if my father withdrew all threats against you and your ranch. And he agreed? Elena asked, incredulous. Yes, but with conditions. Matteo turned himself into the authorities, confessing negligence in the fire. My father dropped the murder charges, but the system had already processed his confession. He's in prison. The horror in Elena's voice was palpable. Fernando nodded slowly. He'll be there at least 6 months while everything is resolved. Legally. My father publicly withdrew his interest in El Amanecer, but I don't trust him. It's just a temporary strategy. Elena sank onto a nearby bench, trying to process the information. Matteo had sacrificed his freedom to protect her and the ranch. Can I see him? She asked after a long silence. Not yet. He's in the state penitentiary, and they don't allow visits during the initial process. That night, as a distant storm rumbled in the mountains, Elena made a decision. If Matteo had risked everything to save El Amanecer, she wouldn't just save the ranch, she'd find a way to free him. With renewed determination, she gathered everyone in the kitchen. Doña Mercedes, Fernando, Lucia, Don Javier, and other neighbors who had been helping. We're going to turn El Amanecer into something Roberto Ibarra can't destroy, she declared. A natural reserve and a horse rehabilitation center, using the techniques I learned from Matteo. You'll need funding, Don Javier warned. And legal protection, Lucia added. And more hands to work, Doña Mercedes completed. Fernando, who had been silent, stood slowly. Can I help with all that? He offered. It's the least I can do after what my father has caused. In the following weeks, the plan took shape. Fernando used his contacts to speed up the protected area declaration. Lucia and her lawyer brother worked on the legal foundation to manage the rehabilitation center. Don Javier mobilized more neighbors for the necessary construction. Elena worked tirelessly, but every night she wrote long letters to Matteo, sending them to the prison, telling him about progress, setbacks, and hopes. She didn't know if he received them, but it was her way of keeping him present, of reminding him she was waiting. 2 months later, she received his first reply. Elena, your letters are my only light here. Keep going with the project. What you're building is more important than any sacrifice I've made. When I get out, I want to see Tormenta fully tamed. It's a challenge between you and me. I miss you every minute, Matteo. With tears in her eyes but a smile on her lips, Elena carefully folded the letter and stored it with her heart. Then she went to the corral where Tormenta grazed calmly. "We've got work to do, friend," she told the horse, stroking its powerful neck. "I'm going to tame you myself, and when Matteo returns, he'll be in for a big surprise." The next downpour caught her working with Tormenta. But this time, instead of fearing the storm, Elena lifted her face to the rain and smiled. Storms no longer brought misfortune to her life. Now they symbolized change, renewal, and the promise of a return. The months slipped by like water through fingers, marked by the relentless rhythm of the seasons. Summer's scorching heat gave way to an autumn of coppery hues. And finally, winter brought an unusual chill to Jalisco. Yet El Amanecer flourished against all odds. Where there had once been only a stable and corrals for livestock, now stood facilities adapted for horse rehabilitation. The old barn had transformed into a small veterinary clinic, where Elena treated special cases from the region. "I never thought I'd see so much change in so little time," Doña Mercedes commented one morning while serving coffee in the newly renovated kitchen. "Your father would be proud, my dear." Elena smiled, though fatigue showed in her eyes. She'd been working since dawn, with a rescued foal that refused to eat. "6 months isn't a short time, Grandma," she replied, blowing on her steaming coffee. "Sometimes it feels like an eternity." They didn't need to mention Matteo to know both were counting the days until his release. The sound of a truck approaching interrupted their conversation. Fernando Ibarra, now a constant presence at El Amanecer, arrived with veterinary supplies and news. "Good morning, family," he greeted, carrying boxes of medicines. "It's freezing out there." Despite his prosthetic leg, Fernando moved with surprising agility. Months of physical work at the ranch had transformed the once spoiled landowner's son into a strong, determined man. "I made you champorado," Doña Mercedes announced, serving him a cup of thick chocolate and cinnamon, extra as he liked it. "Bless you, Doña Mechi," Fernando exclaimed with genuine gratitude. "Your hands are a national treasure." Elena watched the scene with a mix of amazement and satisfaction. Fernando had become like a grandson to her grandmother, who taught him traditional recipes and told him stories of the past that he listened to with fascination. "Any news?" Elena asked, knowing Fernando had visited his lawyer brother the day before. Fernando set his cup down, his expression turning serious. "The judge is reviewing Matteo's case," he reported. "My brother submitted new testimonies, including my statement about my father's responsibility in everything." "And do you think it'll work?" The hope in Elena's voice was almost tangible. "It's likely. My father has lost a lot of influence since his land acquisition practices were exposed." Indeed, Roberto Ibarra was now facing his own legal troubles. The exposure of his fraudulent methods for acquiring properties had triggered a series of investigations that kept him too busy to pursue Matteo or threaten El Amanecer. That afternoon, while sorting through the mail, Elena found a new letter from Matteo. With her heart racing, she tore open the envelope and carefully unfolded the paper. "Dear Elena, the news about the rehabilitation center is wonderful. Every detail you describe makes me feel like I'm there, watching something so important rise from the ashes of what we almost lost. Fernando visited me yesterday and told me about your progress with Tormenta. He says you now let kids ride him during therapy sessions. Who would have thought that stubborn horse would end up a 4-legged therapist? My lawyers are optimistic. They talk about a reduced sentence for good behavior and new evidence. I don't want to get my hopes up, but every day I wake up thinking it might be my last behind these walls. What I miss most isn't freedom. It's the sunrises at the ranch, the smell of wet earth after the rain, and above all, your smile when you achieve something that seemed impossible. Save me a corner at El Amanecer. I promise to make up for every day of absence. Always yours, Matteo." Elena folded the letter carefully, storing it with the others in a small carved wooden box that had belonged to her mother. Through those letters, her relationship with Matteo had grown in ways that might not have been possible under normal circumstances. They had opened up to each other, sharing fears, dreams, and memories they'd never told anyone else. the following days were a whirlwind of activity. A regional agriculture magazine had sent a reporter to write an article about the rehabilitation center and its innovative program with disabled children. The publicity was excellent for attracting donations and establishing the project's legitimacy. One afternoon, while Elena worked with Tormenta in the main corral, the horse began acting strangely, twitching its ears and whinnying toward the entrance road. "What's wrong, boy?" she murmured, stroking his neck. Minutes later, Lucia's truck sped in, raising a cloud of dust. "Elena!" she shouted, jumping out. "We did it!" The judge accepted the evidence and testimonies. "What are you saying?" Elena asked, her heart pounding so hard she could barely breathe. "Matteo will be released tomorrow," Lucia exclaimed, hugging her. "My brother just called. The orders already signed." The news spread like wildfire through the ranch. Doña Mercedes immediately began preparing Matteo's favorite dishes for a welcome dinner. Fernando organized a crew to decorate the main entrance with lights and flowers. Even, Don Javier showed up with a handmade banner that read, "Welcome home, Matteo." Elena could barely contain her excitement as she prepared the truck for the trip to the city the next day. She checked the necessary documents repeatedly, placed clean clothes in the back seat, and even put Matteo's favorite music in the stereo. That night, however, sleep was impossible. Nerves, anticipation, and fear that something might go wrong swirled inside her. What if Matteo had changed? What if she'd idealized their relationship over these months? What if he had other plans, now that he'd be free? When dawn finally painted the sky pink and gold, Elena was already up, ready for the journey. Doña Mercedes, Fernando, and Lucia would accompany her to the city, 3 hours away, to pick up Matteo. "Everything will be fine," her grandmother reassured her, squeezing her hand during the drive. "True love always finds its way." The detention center was a gray, austere building on the city's outskirts. After presenting the documents, they were told to wait in a visiting room. The hours passed with agonizing slowness. Each time the door opened, Elena held her breath, only to sigh in disappointment when it wasn't Matteo. Finally, an officer approached with a confused expression. "Family of Matteo Reyes?" he asked, checking a form. "Yes, that's us," Elena replied, standing. "Where is he?" "According to my records, Mr. Reyes was released this morning at 7, the officer informed. "Another family member came to pick him up, signed all the documents, and left hours ago." Confusion turned to panic. Another family member? Matteo had no close family, at least none Elena knew of. "There must be a mistake," she insisted. "No one else would come for him." But the records were clear. Someone had shown up with the proper documents, and Matteo had left with them hours earlier. The drive back to the ranch was grim. Elena alternated between worry and anger. Why hadn't Matteo waited for her? Who was this person who'd picked him up? Had he decided to start over somewhere else, far from painful memories? To make matters worse, a new storm was forming on the horizon. Black and threatening clouds, gathering, just like that night when Matteo first appeared at her door. "Give him time, my dear," Doña Mercedes advised as the first raindrops hit the windshield. "He must have a good reason." Upon arriving at the ranch, the storm was intensifying. Elena parked in front of the main house and sat for a moment in the truck, watching the rain fall, remembering another stormy night 6 months ago. Finally, she got out and ran to the porch. As she opened the door, she noticed something odd. The main stable's lights were on. "Who's there?" Fernando asked, arriving behind her. "I don't know," Elena replied, feeling a strange mix of fear and hope. "I'll go check." "I'll come with you," he offered. But Doña Mercedes stopped him with a firm hand on his arm. "Let her go alone," the old woman said with an enigmatic smile. "Some things need to be resolved between two people alone." With her heart pounding, Elena walked through the rain to the stable. Her boots sank into the mud, her hair soaked, but she barely noticed. Something inside her knew what she'd find even before she opened the door. And there he was, working calmly with the horses as if he'd never left. Matteo Reyes, thinner but with steady shoulders, was stroking Tormenta while speaking to him softly. "How did you tame this stubborn horse all by yourself?" he said without turning, as if he'd sensed her presence. "I always knew you could do it." "Matteo," Elena whispered, still unable to believe he was real. When he finally turned to her, His smile lit up the entire space. Without another word, Elena ran into his arms, and under the roof of the stable they'd rebuilt together, she found her refuge again. "Why didn't you tell me you were getting out today?" she asked, pulling back slightly to look at him, rainwater mixing with tears on her cheeks. "We waited hours at the detention center." Matteo held her face in his hands, as if afraid she'd vanish if he let go. "I wanted to surprise you," he replied with a smile. "Besides, I needed time to prepare something special." "Prepare what? And who picked you up this morning?" Matteo hugged her again, breathing in the scent of wet earth and wildflowers that always clung to her. "So many questions, Dr. Fuentes," he teased. "Can't you just be happy to see me?" Elena playfully hit his shoulder, laughing through her tears. 6 months, Matteo. 6 months waiting for this moment, imagining how it would be, and you decide to disappear today? "It was a last-minute plan," he explained, taking her hands. "Don Javier came for me. I asked him not to tell anyone because I wanted to prepare something for you. But first, there's something important I need to tell you." The sudden seriousness in his voice made Elena tense. "What's wrong? Is everything okay?" "Roberto Ibarra died 3 days ago," Matteo announced. "A heart attack while he slept." Elena was speechless. The man who had threatened her ranch, who had hunted Matteo for years, who had tried to destroy everything they loved, was simply gone. "Before he died, he confessed all his crimes," Matteo continued. "He completely cleared my involvement in the fire and turned over documents proving his fraudulent dealings." "How is that possible?" Elena asked, incredulous, after everything he'd done. "Fernando says his father changed in his final months. The loneliness, the investigations against him, his son's desertion. It all hit him hard. His last act was one of redemption." From the inner pocket of his jacket, Matteo pulled out a yellow envelope. "These are the titles to all the lands he stole, including the original deeds to El Amanecer," he explained, handing it to her. "You won't have to worry about the mortgage or losing the ranch anymore." Elena opened the envelope with trembling hands, confirming it contained the deeds to her property, free of all liens. It was as if an enormous weight lifted from her shoulders. "It's incredible," she murmured, clutching the documents to her chest. "We can finally look forward without fear." Matteo smiled, taking her hand. "Speaking of looking forward, there's something else I want to show you." He led her toward the stable's exit. Outside, the rain had softened to a gentle drizzle, and the sky was beginning to clear, revealing a few stars. "Where are we going?" Elena asked as Matteo guided her to the horses. "To your special place," he replied, helping her mount Tormenta. "There's something I've been waiting months to do." They rode in silence through the wet fields. The night was surprisingly warm after the storm, and the scent of damp earth filled the air. Elena watched Matteo's profile against the night sky, still unable to believe he was there, free, by her side. As they neared the waterfall, Elena noticed an unusual glow. Small lights twinkled among the trees, illuminating the path like fallen stars. "What is this?" she asked, awestruck. "A surprise," Matteo replied, helping her dismount. "Close your eyes." Taking her hand, he guided her along the lit path. Elena could hear the sound of the waterfall growing closer, mixed with another sound she couldn't quite identify. "Music?" "You can look now," Matteo whispered. When Elena opened her eyes, she gasped. The small waterfall and its lagoon had been transformed. Hundreds of tiny lights hung from the surrounding trees. White and blue flowers adorned strategically placed rocks, and a rustic table with 2 chairs waited by the water, with lit candles and a bottle of wine. "Matteo," she murmured, at a loss for words. "Don Javier, Fernando, and the town boys helped me set it all up this afternoon," he explained. "I wanted our reunion to be special." He led her to the table and offered her a glass of wine. The sound of the falling water created the perfect music for the moment. "For 6 months, I dreamed of this place," Matteo said, looking around. "The waterfall, the ranch, you." "I dreamed of you every night, too," Elena confessed. "Sometimes I was afraid you'd never come back." "Storms brought me to you twice," Matteo replied, taking her hand across the table. "The first time, I was seeking shelter. The second, I've come to stay." if you'll let me. Setting down his glass, Matteo stood and, to Elena's surprise, knelt before her. From his pants pocket, he pulled out a small velvet box. Your grandmother gave me this before I left to face Ibarra, he explained, opening it to reveal a gold ring with a small emerald. It was your mother's. Doña Mercedes said I should give it to you, when I was sure I'd never leave you. Elena looked at the familiar ring with fresh tears. Elena Fuentes, Matteo continued, his voice steady despite the emotion. I'm not looking for temporary shelter. I want to be your permanent refuge, as you've been mine. Would you do me the honor of sharing your life with me? Yes, she replied, without hesitation, extending her trembling hand. Yes, Matteo Reyes. I want to share my life with you. Gently, Matteo slid the ring onto her finger, stood, and pulled her into his arms, kissing her under the now gentle rain, like a blessing over their heads. Their return to the ranch was met with cheers and hugs, as if everyone had been waiting for this moment. Neighbors and friends had gathered at El Amanecer to celebrate Mateo's release and now their engagement. Doña Mercedes hugged Matteo tightly, whispering something in his ear that made him nod solemnly. Fernando shook his hand, their old rivalry, completely forgotten, transformed into a friendship forged in shared adversity. There's something else I want to announce, Fernando said, calling for everyone's attention. In honor of my brother Matteo and the woman who gave him a reason to live, the Ibarra Foundation has decided to allocate the resources needed to expand the rehabilitation center. A murmur of surprise ran through the crowd. The project will not only protect El Amanecer's lands, he continued, but all the ranches in the region that wish to join the aquifer conservation program. Cheers and applause erupted. Elena, leaning on Matteo's shoulder, felt her heart could barely contain such happiness. Your father would be proud, Doña Mercedes commented, approaching the couple. He always dreamed of protecting these lands, for future generations. And now his dream will come true, Elena replied, squeezing Matteo's hand. The celebration continued late into the night, with music, food, dancing, and many shared stories. Elena watched Matteo move among the guests, greeting old friends, thanking those who had supported the ranch in his absence. He was no longer the wandering cowboy who arrived on a stormy night. Now he belonged to this place as much as she did. When the guests finally began to leave, Doña Mercedes approached Lucia, who was collecting empty plates. Who would have thought, the old woman said with a satisfied smile. My granddaughter gave shelter to a wandering cowboy during a storm, never imagining she'd fall in love with him. Fate has strange ways of working, Lucia replied, watching the happy couple say goodbye to the last guests. What neither of them knew, Doña Mercedes continued, is that they both needed to find each other to heal their wounds and create a true home together. Hours later, when the ranch finally fell silent, Elena and Matteo sat on the porch, watching the sky begin to clear. The storm had passed completely, leaving behind clean, fresh air. What are you thinking about? Elena asked, resting against Matteo's chest. How lucky I am, he replied, kissing her hair. How a desperate night became the start of everything good in my life. Elena looked up at the man who had transformed her world. Welcome home, Matteo Reyes, she whispered. This time, for good. The first ray of sunlight peeked over the horizon, bathing El Amanecer in golden light. A new day began, promising not only the renewal that follows a storm, but a future built on truth, forgiveness, and a love that, like the ranch's name, offered new beginnings every morning. A year had passed since that night when Matteo returned. To El Amanecer, 12 months of hard work, fulfilled dreams, and new beginnings that had transformed not only the property, but the lives of everyone involved. The morning was perfect. The spring sun shone over green fields and wildflowers growing along the road. Birds sang from the newly planted trees around the renovated ranch, as if they too were celebrating the special occasion. Elena watched from her bedroom window as workers placed the last chairs by the waterfall. The place that had once been her personal refuge would now become the setting for the most important ceremony of her life. Ready, my dear? Doña Mercedes asked, entering, with a sky-blue dress that highlighted her elegance despite her nearly 80 years. I don't think I've ever been more ready for anything, Elena replied, turning so her grandmother could admire the simple white dress she'd chosen. Nothing ostentatious, just lace and silk that flowed like water when she moved, perfect for an outdoor wedding. Your mother would be so proud, the old woman murmured, adjusting a crown of wildflowers on Elena's loose hair. And your father would have loved Matteo, though he'd have made him suffer a bit first, just for fun. Both laughed, imagining the scene. The memory of Elena's parents no longer brought pain but a sweet nostalgia, as if they were somehow present on this day. I brought something for you, Doña Mercedes said, pulling a worn leather book from her bag. I found it among your father's things a few weeks ago. I was waiting for the right moment to give it to you. Elena took the book curiously. Upon opening it, she immediately recognized her father's firm, clear handwriting. It was his personal diary. There's a marked page, her grandmother indicated. I think you should read it today. With trembling hands, Elena opened the diary to the page marked with a red ribbon. The entry was dated just 2 weeks before the accident that took her father's life. Today, Elena told me about her dream of expanding the veterinary clinic. My daughter has a vision that goes beyond what this old rancher could imagine. She talks of rehabilitation for abused animals, therapies with horses for special needs children, protecting the aquifer. She dreams of turning El Amanecer into a sanctuary for every wounded creature needing a second chance. She reminded me of her mother and her endless ability to see beauty where others see only problems. If something were to happen to me, I know Elena would transform this place into something extraordinary. She just needs to find someone who shares her dreams, someone as stubborn and passionate as she is. When that happens, nothing will stop her. Tears streamed down Elena's cheeks as she finished reading. It's like he knew, she whispered. Like he somehow sensed he wouldn't be here. But everything would turn out okay in the end. Doña Mercedes nodded, wiping her own tears. Your father always had a sixth sense for these things, she replied. And now your dream and his have become reality. A soft knock at the door interrupted the moment. Lucia poked her head in, radiant in her coral-colored maid-of-honor dress. The guests are arriving, she announced, and the groom is so nervous that Don Javier threatened to give him a double tequila if he doesn't calm down. The three women laughed, dispelling the moment's melancholy. It was a day of celebration, after all. The path to the waterfall was decorated with arches of white flowers and blue ribbons swaying gently in the breeze. The guests, no more than 50 close friends and neighbors, waited in rustic wooden chairs arranged in a semicircle by the water. Matteo stood by the waterfall, wearing a light suit that contrasted with his sun-bronzed skin. His nervousness vanished the moment he saw Elena approaching on Don Javier's arm, who had taken on the role of father of the bride in her father's absence. The ceremony was simple and heartfelt. They exchanged vows they'd written themselves, promises that went beyond traditional words. They spoke of storms overcome and refuges found, of second chances and a love forged in adversity. When the judge finally pronounced them husband and wife, and Matteo kissed Elena under a shower of petals thrown by the guests, it seemed the entire natural world celebrated with them. The waterfall sparkled with golden glints, the birds sang with greater enthusiasm, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of blooming fields. The reception took place at the ranch, in the large courtyard now connecting the main house to the new rehabilitation center facilities. Long tables covered with white cloths and wildflower centerpieces welcomed guests for a festive meal prepared by the town's women under Doña Mercedes' direction. During the toast, Fernando Ibarra stood. The young man, once presumed dead, now led the Ibarra Foundation with a vision entirely opposed to his father's. A year ago, he began, raising his glass. We promised this project would protect not only El Amanecer, but the entire region. Today, I'm proud to announce that 5 more ranches have joined our conservation initiative. Enthusiastic applause greeted the news. The aquifer is now protected by federal law, he continued, and our rehabilitation center has been recognized as a model to follow across the country. All this thanks to Elena's vision and Matteo's determination. He raised his glass higher to the bride and groom who taught us that the most beautiful sunrises can come from the worst storms. To the bride and groom, everyone chorused, drinking to their health. As the celebration continued, Lucia approached Elena with a handsome, young man Elena didn't recognize. "Elena, I want you to meet Carlos," she said with a special glint in her eyes. "He's Fernando's younger brother, and my fiancé." "You what?" Elena exclaimed, hugging her friend with joy. "You didn't tell me anything." "We wanted to wait until after your wedding," Lucia explained, blushing. "We got engaged a week ago." Mateo shook Carlos's hand with a conspiratorial smile. "Welcome to the family, brother-in-law," he teased. "I warn you, these women are tough." The afternoon progressed with laughter, music, and dancing. On one side of the courtyard, Elena noticed Doña Mercedes chatting animatedly with Don Javier, their heads close together, sharing what seemed like a delightful secret. "I think there's romance in the air, and not just ours," she commented, to Mateo, discreetly pointing at the elders. "About time," he replied, wrapping an arm around her waist. "Don Javier's been in love with your grandmother since they were young," he told me. As the sun began to set, the bride and groom slipped away from the party to fulfill a tradition they'd established since Mateo's return, watching the sunset from the porch, remembering that first stormy night. "I have a surprise for you," Mateo said, leading her to the renovated stable. "I was saving it for this moment." In the stable, Elena discovered a mare about to give birth, assisted by one of the ranch workers. "You arrived just in time," the boy said. "It's about to start." Over the next hour, Elena and Mateo, still in their wedding clothes, helped deliver the foal. When the tiny creature finally stood on trembling legs, they looked at each other with an emotion beyond words. Life continued to renew itself constantly. "A good omen for a marriage, don't you think?" Mateo commented, embracing her from behind as they watched the mare clean her foal. "New life on our first day as husband and wife." Elena turned in his arms, her face lit by a smile hiding a secret. "Speaking of new life," she began, placing Mateo's hand on her belly. "It seems the little foal won't be the only newcomer at El Amanecer this year." Mateo's eyes widened in surprise, then filled with unshed tears. We're going to—" Elena nodded, laughing at his bewilderment. 3 months, she confirmed. "I wanted to be completely sure before telling you. I confirmed it. Yesterday." Mateo lifted her in his arms, spinning her in the middle of the stable, prompting a protesting whinny from the newly delivered mare. "I'm going to be a father," he exclaimed, his joy uncontainable. Later, when the party finally ended and the last guests left, Elena and Mateo sat on the porch, just as they'd imagined. A gentle spring rain began to fall, refreshing the earth after the hot day. Unlike the past, they no longer sought shelter from the storm. Now they enjoyed the rain, the sound of drops on the roof, the scent of wet earth that so reminded them of their first meeting. "You know," Mateo said, caressing his wife's still flat belly, "I think our son or daughter should have a name tied to rain or storms. After all, without them, we never would have met." "I like that idea," Elena replied, resting against his shoulder. "Something to remind us that storms don't always bring destruction. Sometimes they bring exactly what we need." From the kitchen window, Doña Mercedes watched the couple, a cup of hot tea in her hands. The old woman smiled with satisfaction. "Storms no longer bring fear to El Amanecer," she murmured to herself. "They bring blessings, because when two souls find refuge in each other, not even the darkest sky can tear them apart." With that thought, the matriarch of El Amanecer turned off the kitchen light and retired to rest, leaving the young couple to enjoy their first night as husband and wife under the gentle rain that fell like a promise of better days to come.